Welcome back to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us. You're the crucial third person in this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you here for this.
So our mission today is to dig into episode 3 of our arc on this truly radical framework for inclusive education.
Right, which was developed by Sean Smith.
Exactly. He's a veteran teacher out in Vancouver, British Columbia. I mean, over 30 years in inclusive classrooms.
Yeah, he's definitely speaking from the trenches here.
And we're looking at his 6-part series, Dignified Differentiation. But to start us off, I want you to think about how we usually approach something like engineering or, product design.
Okay, like building a bridge or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's an expectation of absolute rigid precision, right? When a team builds a bridge, the steel they use has a very specific tensile strength.
Right, the load limit is an exact number. It's totally non-negotiable.
Exactly. It's completely binary. The bridge either holds the weight or the bridge collapses.
Yeah, and that objective specification leaves, no room for interpretation. You don't get partial credit for good intentions on a structural load.
No, you definitely don't.
A bridge doesn't care if you tried your best.
Yeah.
It either passes the test or it completely fails.
Right. And we accept that reality for physical structures without question. But the moment we step into the world of human emotion or morality or especially education, we tend to just throw out all the specifications.
Oh, 100%. We start using words like respect and empathy and dignity.
Yes. And we treat those concepts like, I don't know, warm, fuzzy sentiments on a greeting card. We hope they happen, we slap them onto our mission statements, but we almost never treat them like a load-bearing constraint on a bridge.
Which is exactly what makes the framework we're unpacking today so incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
Because whether you're a teacher or a parent, or even if you design user experiences in the corporate world, this completely shifts the paradigm.
It really does.
Sean Smith's central premise is that in education, dignity is not a sentiment. It's not an aspiration or a feeling. Dignity is a rigid pass-fail design constraint.
Right. And to really grasp why a teacher with 30 years of experience decided to make dignity a rigid constraint, we kind of have to look back at the foundation he built in the earlier parts of this series.
Yeah, we have to look at the arc so far.
Right, because in episode 1, we talked about that quiet guilt.
Oh, man, the Tuesday morning photocopier guilt. As a veteran teacher myself, I felt that in my bones.
Yeah, it's that guilt of handing a student a piece of curriculum, knowing full well that this particular student probably isn't going to hit the target, but you choose to act as though they might anyway.
Right, you're both just participating in this shared fiction. The teacher knows it's out of reach, the student knows it, but the system demands they both just go through the motions.
It's so heavy. And then, in episode 2, we looked at his distinction between making work easier versus making it accessible.
Which is a crucial shift. Because making content easier, as he argues, is basically a subtraction operation.
Right, you're just chopping pieces off.
Exactly. You take a complex, beautiful idea and just hack away at it until it fits a lower reading level. You're giving the student less nuance, less complexity, less of the actual meat of the lesson.
Yeah. But making it accessible, on the other hand, means changing the path, not the destination.
You give them the exact same intellectual core, just, through a different door.
And that makes me think about watching a complex movie. Making it easier is like saying, well, the plot of this film is too complicated for you to follow, so I'm just going to cut out the entire final act and hand you a 1-page summary of the ending.
Oh, that's brutal. You've completely robbed them of the experience.
Right. They can't go to the water cooler the next day and discuss the emotional payoff with their friends.
They're completely isolated from the shared cultural moment of the classroom.
But making it accessible is like turning on the subtitles.
Yeah.
You get the exact same story, the exact same tension. You just process it through a different sensory pathway.
Yeah, you change the transit, but you arrive at the same destination. It's a great analogy.
I do have to push back a little bit here, though. As the resident skeptic,
Bring it on.
let's stick with that subtitle analogy. Say you and I are sitting in a crowded movie theater, right? And I am the only person in the room who needs subtitles.
Okay.
So the theater management sets up a specialized bright yellow screen right in front of my seat.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, even if I am getting the same story as everyone else, there are these glaring visual markers singling me out to the rest of the room.
Yeah.
I am still physically marked as different. So if we translate that to, a middle school classroom. How on earth do you avoid that stigma?
Well, that very tension is exactly what launches us into the core of the dignity argument today.
Yeah.
Because Smith acknowledges that complication head on. Even when you successfully rebuild the path, right? Instead of just watering down the content, the physical, visual markers of that accommodation can still basically scream difference to the student and to their peers.
Yeah, they really do.
And this is exactly why the concept of dignity has to become an engineering specification.
Okay, so how does he define the fail condition then? Like, if dignity is a structural load limit now, at what exact moment does our bridge collapse?
The fail condition is immediate, and honestly, it's pretty brutal. A material instantly fails the dignity standard the moment a student can identify it as the lesser version before they even engage with the content.
Wait, like before they even read a single word?
Before they read a single word.
Just from the 3 seconds it takes for the paper to hit their desk.
Exactly. If a student looks at the piece of paper on their desk and then glances over at the paper on their neighbor's desk and instantly knows they received the dummy version, that material has failed the design constraint. Full stop.
Right.
And Smith argues this failure is not just some unfortunate side effect. It is the fundamental problem that this entire framework exists to eradicate.
I mean, we really have to unpack the psychology of why that split second matters so much.
We do, because it's massive.
If you hand a 7th grader a piece of paper that uses like a giant bubbly font with illustrations of baby animals and massive spacing.
Stuff that physically looks like it belongs in a first-grade classroom.
Right. You aren't just hurting their feelings, you are triggering a very real neurological response.
Oh, absolutely.
When a middle schooler feels singled out and infantilized like that, their amygdala just fires up. They feel intense shame. And developmentally, shame literally blocks the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for complex thinking.
Right. They are biologically incapable of learning the material at that exact moment.
No matter how technically accessible the text is.
You're hitting on the exact mechanism that makes this so urgent. Visual difference translates directly to intellectual paralysis.
Wow. Yeah.
So to prevent that, Smith lays out 4 specific requirements. And the first one is that the visual design must be age-appropriate, regardless of the student's actual reading level.
Okay, so that 7th grader's paper must aesthetically look like it belongs in the hands of a 7th grader.
Exactly. You are protecting their social standing in the room so their brain remains open to learning.
Which means the second requirement, the content itself, has to follow suit, right? If the paper looks like it belongs to a 7th grader, you can't just fill it with empty, boring text.
No, the narrative has to be genuinely engaging. The ideas, the characters, the intellectual conflict, it all has to be worth engaging with.
It can't just be a hollow placeholder.
Right. Like if the class is studying the French Revolution, you don't just give the struggling reader a worksheet that says, the king was bad, the people were mad.
Right.
You still have to give them the complex drama of the revolution, the competing philosophies, just written in a syntax they can actually decode.
And if they're getting that complex drama, then the third requirement makes sense. The questions they're asked about it need to demand real thought.
Yes, there is this deeply ingrained bias in education, and honestly just in society at large, that if a person struggles to communicate or decode text, they must also struggle to think abstractly.
Oh, that's such a pervasive assumption.
It is, and Smith aggressively dismantles that bias. A student working at the lowest reading level in the room is still entirely capable of having a profound, complex idea.
So the questions they're given should actually demand one.
Exactly. If the rest of the class is analyzing the moral ambiguity of a historical figure, you cannot just ask the struggling reader to circle the name of the king.
Because doing that tells the student, I don't expect you to have ideas, I just expect you to locate facts.
Right, which leads to his fourth point, which is about honest attention to communication. Closing the gap between what a teacher intends to communicate and what the paper actually screams to the student.
Because a teacher's intent is almost always pure. I mean, they want to help.
Always.
But what they intend to communicate in their heart and what the physical paper communicates in reality are often two entirely different things.
And closing that gap requires brutal honesty.
Well, let me challenge the philosophy of this for a second, though, because we're taking something as deeply human, as nuanced, and as subjective as a student's dignity, right? Their experience of being seen and valued.
Yeah.
And we are reducing it to a cold pass-fail checklist. Isn't there a massive danger there? Doesn't turning dignity into an engineering specification risk losing the soul of the concept entirely?
You know, it's a totally valid fear, and it's one Smith addresses directly from his perspective as a veteran teacher. His counterargument is that the checklist is actually what saves the soul of the concept.
How so?
Well, when dignity is just an aspirational buzzword, it is incredibly easy for a massive educational system to claim they are doing it without actually changing a single thing on the ground.
Oh, right. Like, oh, we treat all our students with dignity.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, the struggling reader is sitting in the corner with a babyish worksheet, feeling completely alienated.
Right.
By turning it into a strict specification, you force the human element to the absolute forefront. You make it impossible to ignore the physical reality of what that student is experiencing. The checklist doesn't replace the empathy. It operationalizes it.
Ah.
It holds the empathy accountable. Instead of just feeling bad for the kid, you have a metric to fix the problem.
Exactly.
But, okay, if the rules are this clear, and we know this operationalized empathy works, why is it so incredibly hard to execute in a real classroom?
Ah, because of what Smith calls the most honest and unresolved tension in his entire framework,
The scaffolding paradox.
the scaffolding paradox. And he gives this paradox a lot of space in his work because it does not have a neat, tidy resolution.
Let's define the mechanism here.
Yeah.
What exactly are these scaffolds and what is the paradox?
Well, let's say a teacher does everything right. They rebuild the path, they maintain the complex narrative, they ask high-level conceptual questions.
But to help the struggling reader actually navigate that path, they have to use scaffolding tools, things like sentence starters, vocabulary boxes prominently placed at the top of the page, graphic organizers, extra white space between the questions.
And we should clarify why those tools are used. It's about managing cognitive load, right? Like, when a strong reader looks at a page, decoding the letters is automatic. Their brain's processing power is fully dedicated to understanding the big ideas.
Yep.
But for a struggling reader, all their mental energy is eaten up just turning the shapes into sounds. They have no processing power left for the concepts.
Right, so scaffolds, like sentence starters, basically offload that processing burden so the student can actually focus on the intellectual meat of the lesson.
It's a brilliant mechanism.
It genuinely is. They provide access to content that the student could not otherwise reach. And Smith himself uses them constantly in his own classroom.
But here is the paradox.
Here's the paradox.
Ah.
Those exact same helpful tools act as glaring visual markers of difference. A typical grade 7 worksheet doesn't have a giant vocabulary box taking up the top third of the page.
No, it doesn't. And if you're listening to this and thinking, well, I'm not a teacher, this doesn't apply to me, think about how your company's HR department might roll out accommodations.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Imagine if you needed extra processing time on your quarterly reports and your boss gave you a bright neon orange desk to signal to everyone not to bother you.
Oh, man.
Right. Yes, you got the time you needed, but every single person walking by knows you are the special case. That is exactly what a giant vocabulary box on a worksheet feels like to a middle schooler.
And a student holding that page knows instantly that this material was manufactured specifically for someone who needs extra help. That knowledge lands. It really hurts.
Yeah.
But the truly insidious part is how it compounds over time.
Because it's not just one worksheet on a Tuesday.
No, it is every day, across weeks, across months, across years. Every single time that student is handed a piece of paper, it is visually distinct from what their peers receive.
Wow.
Over time, that compounding daily visual reinforcement crystallizes into a permanent story. The student tells themselves about their fundamental identity as a learner.
The psychological mechanism is devastating. They internalize the visual difference as an intellectual deficiency.
You are literally handing them a daily physical receipt that says, you are the one who needs the extra help.
That's incredibly heavy.
It is. And to Smith's immense credit, he is incredibly honest about this. He states plainly that he has not solved this design problem.
Really?
Yeah. He's much further along on solving the content problem, keeping the ideas complex, than he is on the visual design problem. The scaffolding tools help the student learn, but they also marks the student.
Okay, I have to jump in here and aggressively advocate for the teachers.
I thought you might.
Because I can feel the stress levels rising for any educator listening to this right now. We're identifying a massive problem, but we also have a massive time and system constraint in reality.
Oh, absolutely.
We are asking teachers who are already stretched incredibly thin, who are working late nights and weekends, to somehow magically redesign, publish standardized curriculum so that it's completely invisible to peers. yet perfectly supportive to the individual student.
It's a huge ask.
Is this actually a fair request of a single teacher? I mean, isn't this just a massive systemic failure of the publishing industry and curriculum designers?
You are pressing on the exact nerve of the issue. It is undeniably a systemic failure of the publishing industry.
Okay.
Most published modified materials simply do not meet the dignity standard.
Hmm.
They rely heavily on simplification and blatant visual markers.
Hmm.
And asking a single teacher to manually redesign everything, it's an impossible time constraint. It breaks down under real classroom conditions.
Right. So why put this burden on the teacher's shoulders at all then? Why not just demand better from the textbook companies and move on?
Because, as Smith points out, you cannot work on a problem you haven't named. The reality is, the teacher is the last line of defense before that piece of paper hits the student's desk. Smith isn't demanding that teachers instantly cure systemic disease by working 80-hour weeks.
Okay.
What he is demanding is that we stop pretending our current medicine doesn't have devastating side effects. He's asking teachers to see the problem clearly. Because once you see it, once you recognize the compounding cost of those scaffolding tools, it fundamentally changes the way you approach your classroom.
Right. It's the difference between doing harm ignorantly and doing harm consciously.
Exactly.
But if you know the system is failing the student, where does a teacher even begin to unravel it without just burning out entirely?
Well, it starts with a shift in perspective. The solutions might be small at first. Maybe you put the vocab box on the back of the page or you project it on the board for everyone to use. But the entry point is a very specific, very uncomfortable question.
Right, the mirror.
Yeah. It's the question Smith started asking himself when he looked at the materials he had spent hours creating for his own struggling students.
I have this quote right here in my notes, and it is an absolute gut punch.
Read it.
Smith asks, if I were the student and I picked this up, what would I understand about myself from looking at it before I read a single word?
It is a profound shift. It forces the creator of the material to completely abandon their own viewpoint.
Yeah.
When a teacher makes a scaffolded worksheet, they're looking at it through the lens of their own effort. They see the hours they spent. They see their deep desire to help the student succeed.
But this question forces them to look in the mirror from the other side.
Right. The student doesn't see the teacher's late nights. The student doesn't see the love and the intention. The student only sees what the physical paper communicates.
And confronting the gap between your desire to help and the stark reality of what you have actually handed a child is deeply uncomfortable.
It really is.
And I think everyone listening to this can relate to that discomfort in their own lives. I mean, think about the last time someone tried to help you in a way that just felt entirely patronizing.
Well, we've all been there.
Right. Their intention was probably totally pure. They genuinely wanted to assist you. But their delivery, the way they spoke to you or the assumptions they made, completely stripped away your dignity in that moment.
Yeah, it makes you feel small.
That exact feeling, that disconnect between good intent and patronizing delivery is the discomfort Smith is asking educators to sit with.
And it is a vital discomfort.
Yeah.
Because it locates the standard of dignity exactly where it belongs.
Right.
Not in the teacher's heart, but in the student's hands.
Yeah.
It happens in that split second before the reading begins, when the student is subconsciously absorbing what the environment is telling them about their own worth.
Because if you ask that question honestly, and the answer is, this worksheet tells the student they are less than, you can't unsee it. You are ethically obligated to try and change it.
Exactly. So to kind of synthesize the journey we've just taken in this session,
Please do.
we started with the quiet guilt of lowering standards. We moved to the vital distinction between making things easier through subtraction versus making them accessible by changing the path. We established Smith's rigorous design constraint for visual dignity. And finally, we sat with the deeply unresolved paradox that our most helpful scaffolding tools are often our most stigmatizing markers of difference.
It's a heavy realization, but it is an incredibly necessary one. And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a brand new question to chew on. Something that builds on everything Smith has pointed out about the scaffolding paradox.
I love this part.
We've spent this entire time talking about how to hide the scaffolds, how to make the accessible worksheet blend in so the struggling student doesn't look different from the rest of the class.
Right.
But what if the real villain here isn't the scaffolding itself? What if the real villain is the concept of a standardized aesthetic to begin with?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Think about it. If every single student in a classroom was given materials that looked wildly different by default, If there was no such thing as a normal worksheet to compare against,
Yeah.
would the scaffolding paradox disappear entirely? Is our relentless pursuit of uniformity in education the actual enemy of human dignity?
That's a fascinating systemic question.
Uh,
Because, yeah, if difference is the baseline, then no one is marked by being different.
exactly. Just something to mull over the next time you are designing a presentation or a user interface or, just helping a kid with their homework.
It changes everything.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If you want to explore Sean Smith's full six-part series, including his thoughts on using AI to solve these exact design challenges, or if you want to read his Substack posts and find information about his one-to-one coaching,
Which I highly recommend.
you can find all of his work at reimaginelearning.ca. Go look closely at the helpful systems in your own life this week, and we'll catch you next time.